I never imagined that the last $10 in my pocket would become the crossroads between the life I knew and a future I could not even begin to picture. My shift at the nursing home ended late that night, 11:30 p.m. Sharp, the same exhausting routine I had followed for years. My feet throbbed inside worn-out sneakers, my scrubs were stiff with the smell of disinfectant, and my stomach growled from a skipped dinner. When I stepped into the dim parking lot, the cold wind rushed through the gaps in the chain-link fence and made the flickering streetlight buzz louder. I reached into my pocket, counted one bill, and held it between my fingers. $10. It was supposed to be for Ben's breakfast in the morning. No mother should ever stare at her last $10 and wonder how to stretch it into hope. But there I was, rubbing the soft corner of the bill and wishing it felt like more. The lot was nearly empty except for a broken shopping cart tipped on its side, rattling each time the wind pushed it. I kept my arms wrapped around myself, waiting for the bus that always came late. Then I heard it. A sound sharp enough to slice through the cold. A harsh, choking gasp. My head jerked toward the far end of the lot, where a massive man collapsed beside a sleek black sedan. Even in the dim light, I could see his body jerk once his hand clawing at his chest as he tried to breathe. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the pavement, lips turning gray. I had seen that look before. Cardiac arrest. Or damn close. Before I could move, two men smoking near the dumpster shouted at me. "Don't touch him!" Lady one yelled. "He's mafia!" The other shook his head violently. "If you help him, they'll come for you next. Walk away." Everything in me froze. Mafia. The word hit me like ice water. I looked again at the man on the ground. A silver ring shaped like a crest glinted on his knuckles. A rosary tattoo curled up his wrist. He was enormous, intimidating even in his weakest moment. Every instinct screamed at me to stay out of it. I had a son to think about. I had bills overdue. I had no money, no safety net, nothing that allowed room for dangerous choices. I took one step back, then another. The man's breathing suddenly went silent. My heart dropped. Memories of my mother flashed across my mind, the way strangers walked past her as she lay dying from a stroke years ago. I had lived with the guilt of that moment for half my life. I could not live with another one. "I'm a nurse," I whispered to myself, though fear made my voice shake. "He's a human being." I ran toward the convenience store, grabbed aspirin and a bottle of water, and placed them on the counter. $10, the cashier said without looking up. I hesitated only long enough to feel my stomach twist for Ben. Then I handed over the bill. Breakfast would have to wait. I knelt beside the man, lifted his head, checked his fading pulse, and pressed the aspirin into his mouth. "You have to chew," I urged, my hands trembling. "Come on, stay with me." His eyelids fluttered. "Why?" "Are you helping me?" he whispered, voice thin as air. "Because no one else will," I said. Sirens finally screamed in the distance. The paramedics rushed over, lifted him onto a stretcher. Just before they closed the doors, his hand shot out and gripped my wrist. "Tell them Victor sent you," he rasped, then slipped under again. I sat frozen on the cold pavement, heart pounding. I didn't know who Victor was. I didn't know what those words meant. I only knew that nothing about my life would be the same after tonight. I suppose before I tell you what happened after that night, I should explain who I was before everything changed, because none of what followed will make sense unless you understand the life I was trying so desperately to hold together. My name is Elena Reyes, and at 34 years old, I was a single mother living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment with peeling paint, a broken heater, and a landlord who sighed every time I was even a day late on rent. My son Ben, 7 years old, slept in the smaller room, his inhaler tucked under his pillow like a security blanket. His asthma had been unpredictable since he was 3, which meant I always lived with two kinds of fear: the fear of not having enough money for groceries and the fear of waking up to hear him wheezing in the dark. His medications alone cost more than most of my paychecks could comfortably handle, and I had become an expert at stretching prescriptions longer than they were meant to last. I worked 2 jobs because one simply wasn't enough to survive where we lived. At night, I worked as a CNA at Rosewood Nursing Home, caring for elderly residents whose families rarely visited. During the day, I worked the register at a corner market 2 bus rides away. Between both jobs, I sometimes managed to scrape together enough for rent, electricity, and a few modest dinners. Other times, especially in the winter months when utilities soared, I came up short and had to negotiate with the landlord or let something else slide. The truth is, when you're poor in America, you get used to choosing which crisis to handle and which one to pray doesn't explode yet. Ben's father had left when he was 2. He wasn't a bad man, just a weak one, someone who crumbled under the weight of responsibility. After 6 months of sporadic visits and broken promises, he disappeared entirely, and with him went any chance of financial support. I stopped expecting help. I stopped expecting apologies. I stopped expecting anything except the weight of everything falling on my shoulders. But the hardest part of my life wasn't the money, it was the memories. My mother had died when I was 19, right in front of a crowded bus stop. She collapsed onto the bench, clutching her chest, begging for breath, while people stared, unsure whether she was drunk or sick or simply being dramatic. No one called for help. I screamed. I pleaded, but by the time an ambulance arrived, she was gone. That moment carved something permanent inside me, a vow I never spoke aloud but carried everywhere. If I had the power to help someone, I would never look away, even when it terrified me, even when it cost me. At the nursing home, the other CNAs sometimes teased me for being too soft. "You care too much, Elena. You get attached. You'll burn yourself out." But I couldn't be any other way. When one of my patients reached for my hand, or when someone whispered that they were scared of dying, I stayed. I listened. Maybe it was my mother's voice echoing through those rooms. Maybe I just refused to let anyone else feel abandoned. Still, kindness didn't pay bills. Every week, I gathered the little slips of paper that summarized my hours from both jobs and tried to make them fit like puzzle pieces over a life that constantly outgrew them. Sometimes I skipped lunch to save a few dollars. Sometimes dinner, too. Food stamps helped, but only so far, and there were months when I prayed the pantry wouldn't run empty before my next paycheck. Ben tried to pretend he didn't notice, but children always notice. One night, he asked Mom, "Why don't you eat more?" I told him mothers have magic stomachs. He believed me for now, and I hated how grateful I was for his innocence. Our neighbors in the apartment complex were a mix of working-class families, immigrants, retirees, and people who had learned to be afraid of the world. They warned me, often sometimes gently, sometimes harshly. "You're too nice, Elena. Kindness won't feed your kid. Kindness won't keep the lights on. Kindness won't protect you." But they didn't understand. Kindness was the only thing that had ever held my life together. Without it, I felt like I might simply crack. There was one neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, who often watched Ben during my double shifts. She was in her 60s, a retired librarian with silver hair always pinned neatly at the back of her head. She liked to say she loaned out books for 40 years and never once had someone return them on time, which taught her more about people than any classroom could. She worried about me. She worried a lot. One night, as I picked Ben up from her place, she asked if I ever got scared walking home so late. I told her I didn't have time to be scared. That was a lie. Fear was my constant companion. Fear of failing. Ben, fear of losing my job. Fear of something happening to me and him ending up alone in the world. Every night on that dark walk between the bus stop and our building, I felt the weight of the world sitting between my ribs. But I pushed through it because mothers don't have the luxury of falling apart. Even with the exhaustion and fear, I still believed in goodness. I still believed in helping people. It was why I became a CNA in the first place. It was why I offered my bus seat to tired strangers. It was why I once walked 3 blocks out of my way to help a woman who dropped her groceries. And it was why, when a man collapsed in a dark parking lot and no one else moved, something inside me refused to abandon him. Of course, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what world he belonged to. I didn't know how my decision would ripple outward and touch every corner of my life. I only knew the truth I had lived with since my mother died. You don't get to choose who deserves kindness. You only choose whether you give it. And that choice, the night I spent my last $10 to help a dying stranger, was about to cost me more and give me more than anything I had ever imagined. The morning after I helped the collapsing stranger should have felt ordinary, but nothing about my body felt ordinary when I woke up. My hands still trembled from the adrenaline that had flooded through them the night before, and every few minutes my mind replayed the moment his breathing stopped. I kept hearing that awful silence, the kind that makes your chest tighten because you know something irreversible might happen next. I had barely slept. Even after I crawled into bed beside Ben, even after I listened to the soft rhythm of his breathing and reminded myself that he was safe, I felt the weight of fear pressing on my sternum. By sunrise, I convinced myself I was overreacting. People collapsed all the time. I just happened to be there. I just happened to help. Nothing more, nothing less. But as I walked Ben to Mrs. Dalton's apartment, the icy January air clawed at my skin and the parking lot kept flashing in my memory like a warning I didn't yet understand. At the nursing home, I tried to focus on my tasks, changing linens, repositioning patients, taking vitals. But every time I passed the supply closet, I remembered grabbing that aspirin with shaking hands. Every time my phone buzzed, I wondered if it would be the police asking questions. By my lunch break, I was chewing my thumbnail to the point of pain. Two nurses sat beside me in the staff room, chatting about a television show, but the words washed over me as I drifted back into the night again. When my shift finally ended, I stood at the bus stop with a knot forming in my stomach. I kept telling myself nothing bad would happen, but dread had a way of whispering louder than reason. I wrapped my coat tighter around me and breathed into my hands, trying to stay warm. The bus took longer than usual, and by the time I stepped off near the nursing home where my second shift would begin, twilight had already started to fade. The sky deepened into a purple-blue bruise, the kind that signals a cold night ahead. I still had 10 minutes before clock-in, so I crossed the parking lot toward the vending machine to buy something cheap to settle my stomach. But halfway there, a man stepping out of a pickup truck called out to me. "You were here last night, right?" His voice was sharp, accusing. I froze. "What?" "You were the one with that guy. The one who collapsed." I swallowed. "Yes, I guess. I helped him until the ambulance came." The man stared at me, jaw clenched. "You shouldn't have touched him. If he dies, they're gonna look for someone to blame." My blood ran cold. "Blame for helping," he scoffed. "For interfering. And trust me, people like him don't forgive easily." He slammed his truck door and drove off before I could respond. I stood rooted to the pavement, the cold biting into my legs. His comments rattled inside my head until my heart started racing again. I had helped someone, a human being, a man who had stopped breathing. How could that ever be wrong? I tried to shake off the unease and went into work. But even there, every sound startled me. Every distant shout made me jump. I couldn't stop thinking about the stranger's tattoos. The rosary inked around his wrist, the crest on his ring. Signs I had ignored in the moment because all I saw was a dying man. Hours into the shift, I checked my phone in the break room. No messages, no calls, no news. Maybe he was fine. Maybe he wasn't. The unknown was suffocating. When my shift ended at midnight, exhaustion dragged at every step I took toward the exit. But the moment I pushed open the door to the parking lot, something in the air felt wrong. Too still, too quiet, too watchful. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. The wind kicked up swirling loose gravel at my feet. A flickering streetlight buzzed to life and then dimmed again, casting the lot in broken shadows. I walked faster. But as I neared the bus stop, a figure stepped out from behind one of the columns. My heart leaped into my throat. It was a young man, maybe late 20s, wearing a dark coat and a black beanie pulled low. He wasn't familiar, and something about the way he held himself made my breath catch. "You, Elena?" he asked quietly. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He held up his hands as if to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to scare you. I just need to talk. You helped someone last night, a man named Victor." My knees weakened. Is he okay?" The man looked at me for a long moment and then nodded slowly. "Because of you? Yes." My legs almost gave out with relief. Thank God. But the relief lasted only a heartbeat before the young man added, "He asked me to find you. He said you changed everything." A chill ran through me. Changed what? The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white card. Simple. Plain. Only a phone number and a small symbol of a crown inked in gold. He pressed it into my hand. "Call tomorrow. He wants to see you." I stared at the card. "Why?" "He said you'd understand when you come." Then he stepped back into the shadows and disappeared into the darkness as silently as he had appeared. I stood frozen under the streetlight, the card trembling in my grip. I didn't understand anything at all. I only knew that my life had just crossed a line I never meant to cross. And there was no going back. By the time dawn crept across the sky the next morning, painting the apartment walls in a pale gray wash, I already sensed something was wrong. It wasn't anything dramatic. No pounding on my door, no ringing phone, just a heaviness in the air like a storm building behind quiet clouds. Ben was still asleep, his small hand clutching the blanket near his chin. I brushed his hair gently before slipping out of the room, telling myself that whatever fear lingered from last night would fade once the sun rose. But fear has a way of growing quieter, not smaller. I tried to focus on the morning routine. Heat water, stir oatmeal, add honey if we had any left. We didn't. As I packed Ben's inhaler into his backpack, there was a sudden knock at the door. Not a neighbor's knock. Firmer. Official. My breath hitched as I opened it to find 2 police officers standing in the hallway. The older one stepped forward and showed his badge. "Ma'am, are you Elena Reyes?" My voice cracked as I answered. "Yes. Is something wrong?" "We're following up on a medical emergency reported last night. The man you assisted in the parking lot, Victor Ferraro." The world seemed to tilt. Even the name sounded dangerous. The younger officer studied me closely. "Can you tell us everything that happened?" My mouth went dry. I explained what I had seen, how he collapsed, how no one else moved, how I used my last $10 to buy aspirin and water. The older officer's expression softened for a moment, but the younger one frowned. "You touched him, though he asked. You administered aid?" I hesitated, feeling something sharp twist in my stomach. "I'm a CNA." He wasn't breathing. I couldn't just stand there. The younger officer stepped aside and muttered into his radio. The older one lowered his voice. "Look, Ms. Reyes, I'm not here to criticize you. What you did probably saved his life. But you need to understand something. This man is not just anyone. He's tied to people we monitor closely, people who take things personally." My hands felt cold. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" He didn't answer directly. "Just be aware. If anyone contacts you, call us immediately." As they left, the neighbors' doors cracked open. Curious eyes, whispering tones. I felt my cheeks burn. Within minutes, the entire hallway buzzed with speculation. By the time I dropped Ben off at Mrs. Dalton's, she already knew. Her face was pale as she pulled me inside. "Elena, honey, people are talking. Someone said the police were at your door." I tried to reassure her, but my voice trembled. "I just helped a man who needed help." She pressed her lips together and lowered her voice. "That's not just a man. That family. They have history. Dangerous history. You have a child. You cannot put yourself at risk like that." Every word felt like a slap. I didn't fight back. I just left quietly, letting her disapproval settle over me like a heavy coat. On the bus ride to work, I felt eyes lingering on me. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe not. People sense fear the way animals do. It changes how you hold yourself, how you breathe. When I walked into the nursing home, the first coworker who saw me raised an eyebrow. "Girl, is it true? You helped a mafia guy." The words spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, every whisper stopped when I entered the room. A few people nodded in sympathy, but most stared with wide, fearful eyes. One CNA pulled me aside. "I'm just saying you should have walked away. Those people don't forget faces." "They don't forgive either." I wanted to scream that I hadn't known who he was, that I wasn't thinking about crime families or consequences. I was thinking about his chest not rising. I was thinking about my mother, but the words stayed trapped in my throat. After work, as I walked to the bus stop, a group of teenagers passed by, laughing at something on a phone. One of them pointed at me. "That's her. The lady who saved the mob guy." Their laughter wasn't kind. I felt myself shrinking as I hurried past. At home, things worsened. That evening, Ben came out of his room with red, swollen eyes. "Kids at school said you work for bad guys," he whispered. "They said our building would get shot up because of you." I dropped to my knees and hugged him tightly, trying to steady my shaking breath. "Baby, listen to me. I did the right thing. I helped someone. Helping isn't wrong." But he pulled back, fear flickering across his face. "Are we safe, Mom?" My heart cracked. I wanted to promise him we were. I wanted to say no one would ever hurt us. But I didn't know anymore. Before I could answer, another knock rattled the door. This time, it was the landlord. He stood stiffly, arms crossed. "Ms. Reyes, I'm hearing some troubling things. Police visits, possible criminal involvement. We can't have that kind of attention on the property." I felt my knees weaken. Are you evicting us?" "Not yet. But I expect this situation to be handled fast. Whatever you did, undo it." The words stung. After he left, I sank onto the couch and buried my face in my hands. Shame, fear, confusion, all of it tangled together until I could hardly breathe. Night settled over the apartment like a shadow stretching across my chest. I sat in the dark long after Ben fell asleep, replaying every moment of that night. The warnings, the man's ring, his tattoos, his last words. "Tell them. Victor sent you." I whispered into the silence. What did I do? But the silence didn't answer. And deep down, I knew the real backlash hadn't even begun. The next morning began with a sound so deep and violent that for a split second I thought an earthquake had hit our neighborhood. The windows rattled against their frames, the dishes in the cabinets clinked, and a low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. Ben bolted upright in his bed, eyes wide, clutching his blanket as if the world were ending. "Mom, what is that? Is it thunder?" But the sky outside was clear, washed in pale morning sunlight. This wasn't weather. The sound was steady, rhythmic, mechanical. Engines. Many of them. The kind of engines that didn't belong anywhere near our quiet, low-income block. I felt a chill spread across my arms as I pulled back the curtain. What I saw stole the breath right out of my lungs. Motorcycles. Dozens at first, then hundreds, filling both sides of the street. Sleek black bikes gleaming under the sun-chrome pipes catching the light. Men in dark suits and heavy coats stood in perfect formation, silent, still, and terrifying in their unity. Some wore sunglasses even though the sun was barely up. Others had expressionless faces carved from stone. They were not random gang members. They were organized, controlled, like soldiers, or ghosts from a world I had accidentally stepped into. My throat tightened. Ben crawled into my lap and whispered, "Mom, are those the bad guys I didn't know how to answer?" From behind me, Mrs. Dalton burst into my apartment without knocking, her face drained of all color. "Elena, stay away from the windows. Do you hear me? Stay away." Before I could respond, we heard the first police sirens. 2 patrol cars screeched onto the street, officers stepping out with hands hovering over their holsters. But the men in suits didn't move. They stood calmly like they were expecting the attention. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. I pulled Ben away from the window, but I couldn't stop glancing back, unable to reconcile what I was seeing with the life I had lived until now. Then, someone stepped forward from the center of the group. A young man, maybe late 20s, the same one who had approached me near the bus stop the night before. The black beanie was gone. Now he wore a tailored charcoal suit, the kind politicians wore during televised hearings. He moved with confidence, almost elegance, and the entire formation subtly shifted as if acknowledging his position. He looked toward my building, toward my window, and then he nodded. Every man on that street turned their gaze to my apartment. My blood went cold. A murmur rose among the neighbors outside. People began backing up their children, pulling them into doorways and behind fences. Someone shouted, "Who are they here for?" Another voice cried, "Call for backup! This is a gang invasion!" The police officers stepped forward, hands now firmly on their holsters. Gentlemen, disperse immediately. The streets are residential. You are intimidating the public. One of the suited men stepped forward and spoke in an even tone. We are unarmed. We are peaceful. We are here for one person only. The officer demanded who the man pointed up. My apartment. My window. Me. Mrs. Dalton gasped behind me. Oh, dear God, Elena, what have you done? My knees nearly gave out. Before I could blink the young man from the night before, Luca walked calmly toward the building entrance while the others remained still. The officers blocked him, hands raised. Sir, stop right there. He held out a folded document stamped with an attorney's seal. I am acting as representative for the Ferraro family. One of your paramedics filed a report verifying the life-saving intervention performed by the resident known as Elena Reyes. We are here on behalf of our recovering client, Mr. Victor Ferraro, who has personally requested her presence. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Luca added, We mean no harm, but we will not leave without speaking to her. The police backed away, slightly clearly unsure what to do next. My heart hammered in my chest as the building door buzzed. A moment later, someone knocked softly on my apartment door. Not pounding, not threatening. A polite, controlled knock. Ben clung to my side, shaking. Mrs. Dalton whispered, Don't open it. Please, Elena, don't. But something inside me knew this moment wouldn't pass. Whatever this was, whoever these people were, it was connected to me now. If I hid, if I ran, it wouldn't make them disappear. With trembling fingers, I opened the door. Lucas stood there, hands clasped respectfully in front of him, no threat in his posture. Ms. Reyes, good morning, he said in a calm, steady voice. I apologize for the commotion. Our presence is not meant to frighten you. I could barely breathe enough to answer. Why are you here? He stepped back slightly and motioned toward the street. Because you saved our boss, and our boss is not a man who forgets a debt. I felt dizzy, a debt I only helped. He shook his head. No. You intervened when no one else did. You purchased medication with your last $10. You kept him alive until the ambulance arrived. What you did was not nothing. It was everything. Before I could respond, Luca did something that shocked every witness on the street. He bowed his head, not a quick nod, a full deep bow of respect. And as if on command, the 100 men in formation outside bowed their heads as well. Gasps rose from every window, every doorway, every porch. My landlord, who had threatened eviction only the night before, nearly dropped the mug he was holding. Mrs. Dalton gripped my arm as tears filled her eyes. My goodness, Elena, they're honoring you. I whispered. But why? Luca lifted his head, and for the first time there was warmth in his expression. Because Mr. Ferraro believes the world is changed by those who show mercy when no one is watching. He wishes to thank you personally, and he requests your presence at his home. My voice cracked. His home. Now. If you're willing, yes. If not, we will wait. All day, if necessary. I glanced at Ben, who looked terrified but trusting. At Mrs. Dalton, who looked torn between pride and panic. At the street full of men who had arrived not with violence, but with reverence. And then I realized something so simple it made my chest tighten. Whatever world Victor belonged to, my act of kindness had reached into it, and now it was reaching back. I swallowed hard. I'll come. Luca nodded once relief, softening his features. Very well, Ms. Reyes. We'll escort you. As I stepped out of my apartment, the roar of engines softened, and the wall of suited men parted down the middle, creating a pathway that led straight to a waiting black car. Every pair of eyes watched me, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with something I couldn't decipher yet. Respect? Fear? Or the beginning of something far larger than I understood. All I knew was that the moment I climbed into that car, the life I had known would be behind me, and the world of Victor Ferraro would open its doors. The drive to Victor Ferraro's home felt like entering another world, one paved not just with wealth, but with secrets older and heavier than anything I had ever carried. The black sedan moved in a silent, steady glide along the highway, escorted by 2 motorcycles in front and 2 behind their engines, humming like a warning and a promise at the same time. I sat in the back seat, hands clenched in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. Luca sat beside me, polite and composed, though he kept glancing my way as if checking whether I might faint. Outside the tinted windows, the city slowly transformed from aging buildings and cracked sidewalks into wide streets lined with manicured lawns and towering iron gates. I had never driven through a neighborhood like this and certainly never expected to be escorted into one. Ben wasn't with me, but the thought of him pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. What am I doing? What am I walking into? The car slowed as we approached a large stone gate guarded by two men in charcoal suits. They didn't look like security guards from the mall. They looked like men who had seen the worst parts of the world and still stood tall. As the gate opened, the mansion appeared stretching across the property like a silent monument. 3 stories of stone and glass, dark wooden shutters and ivy trailing like veins along the walls. The fountain in front was so massive it looked like it belonged to a museum. The moment the car stopped, Luca opened his door and stepped out before offering me a hand. I hesitated, then took it. My legs felt stiff as I climbed out. The air smelled of cedar and winter flowers, a scent so foreign to my reality that I worried my clothes carried the scent of cheap detergent and bus exhaust. "This way," Ms. Reyes Luca said. He led me through a set of grand double doors that opened into a foyer larger than the entire apartment I lived in. The marble floor gleamed, reflecting a chandelier dripping with crystals. Elegant paintings lined the hall. Not gallery pieces, family portraits. This was someone's home, not a fortress. Yet I could feel the tension in the air, the sense that every person here knew their role in a system that once operated in the shadows. A woman with silver hair and sharp eyes appeared beside the staircase. She gave a short nod to Luca before turning to me. "Ms. Reyes, I'm Dr. Moretti, Mr. Ferraro's physician. He regained consciousness this morning and has been asking for you." Relief washed over me so powerfully I nearly staggered. He's okay. Thanks to you." She motioned toward a hallway. "He's eager to speak with you." As I followed, her fear and curiosity knotted together in my chest. What could a man like Victor possibly want from me? The doctor opened a door and I stepped into a quiet room, softly lit by morning sun. Victor Ferraro lay in a hospital-style bed, hooked to monitors that beeped steadily. Without the coat in the streetlight shadows, he looked older, weary, and somehow painfully human. His eyes, dark and piercing, lifted toward me. "Elena Reyes," he said, his voice gravelly but steady. "Come closer." I approached slowly, unsure whether to sit or stand. Victor gestured weakly toward a chair. "Sit, please." I lowered myself into the seat, still gripping my hands tightly. He studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "You saved my life." I felt heat rise in my face. "I did what anyone would do." He shook his head, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "No, most people ran. You stayed. You paid for medication with your last $10. That doesn't happen in this world anymore." I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Victor shifted slightly, wincing from the pain. "I spent my life in a world where people take more than they give," he said. "I led men who followed strength, fear, and rules carved in stone. That world cost me everything that mattered." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" He looked toward a framed photo on the bedside table. It showed a teenage boy, maybe 16, with thick dark hair and bright eyes. "My son," he said softly. "Marco. He died 3 years ago. Overdose." The word hung in the air like smoke. I blinked. "I'm so sorry." Victor nodded, once his jaw tightening. "I spent decades building a name that terrified people, and none of it mattered when my boy needed help. The system swallowed him. Rehab wait lists, insurance denials, bureaucracy that chewed through our time." He glanced at the photo again, pain flickering in his eyes. "By the time I found a program that could have saved him, it was too late." He exhaled shakily. "I made a promise at his funeral. I would spend the rest of my life saving every kid I could, no matter who they were, no matter where they came from." My throat tightened as he continued. "I built a foundation. Quiet, off the grid. We fund emergency rehab beds, counseling, housing. We keep young people alive long enough to give them a second chance. You saved the man who runs it, and that means you saved the kids we haven't reached yet." Tears pricked at my eyes. I had never expected anything like this. Victor folded his hands slowly over his blanket. You did more than save my life. You protected my promise, my legacy. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, the door opened. Luca stepped in, holding a thick envelope. Boss, they're ready when you are. Victor motioned for him to come closer. Give it to her. Luca handed me the envelope with both hands. I frowned as I opened it. Inside were documents, a formal job offer, full-time position at the Ferraro Foundation, salary triple what I had ever seen in my life, health insurance with full coverage for Ben's asthma treatments, a lease agreement for a renovated apartment closer to Ben's school, a car voucher, even a childcare stipend. My breath hitched as I flipped through the pages. Why? Why me? I whispered. Victor looked at me with a steady gaze. Because the world needs people who don't hesitate when kindness calls. Because you understand suffering. Because you didn't treat me like a monster. You treated me like a man whose life mattered. He paused, then added, You saw me. Not the stories, not the shadows. Just me. Tears blurred my vision. I'm nobody, I said quietly. I'm just trying to keep my son alive. A faint smile curved his lips. That's exactly the kind of person who changes the world. Before I could respond, Victor lifted a folder resting beside his bed and slid it toward me. Inside were blueprints, architectural drawings, a community center in my neighborhood. I blinked, confused. What is this? His voice softened. The Reyes Community Center, a place for families like yours. Job training, after-school programs, mental health services, food support, medical care, a full team funded indefinitely. My heart thundered. You're naming it after me? Yes, he said simply. Because you remind me of who my son could have become if someone had chosen compassion instead of fear. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The weight of it overwhelmed me. He reached out, placing his hand gently over mine. You changed everything, Elena. Now let us change everything for you. I closed my eyes as tears fell, and in that moment I realized nothing in my life would ever be the same again. 1 year can pass quietly, slipping through unnoticed days and fading routines, or it can reshape a life so completely that you barely recognize the person you once were. For me, the last 12 months did not pass quietly. They unfolded like chapters in a book I never expected to read, each page filled with moments that pushed me further from the woman who once counted her last $10 under a flickering parking lot light. The Reyes Community Center opened its doors 9 months after Victor handed me the blueprints. I still remember the day the construction crews arrived in my neighborhood. Residents peeked from behind blinds as trucks unloaded materials and workers set up temporary fencing. Some people whispered that it had something to do with the bikers who had flooded the street that morning months earlier. Others thought it was a city project. No one imagined it had anything to do with me, and in those early days, I kept the truth close to my chest. Not because I wanted secrecy, but because I still couldn't believe it myself. When the building finally stood complete, its wide glass windows reflecting the afternoon sun, the transformation of the neighborhood felt almost symbolic. The gray, fading block where I had spent years scraping by suddenly had a beacon of warmth and possibility rising from its center. On opening day, I stood before the entrance with Ben holding my hand. He wore a small blue button-up shirt, his hair neatly combed, eyes shining with excitement he didn't fully understand. Crowds gathered along the sidewalk, neighbors who had once avoided eye contact with me, now smiling, curious, hopeful. The mayor showed up. Local news cameras rolled. Reporters asked questions about the sudden funding, about the surprise construction, about the unexpected support flowing into a forgotten part of the city. I told them the truth. Kindness opened the door. Compassion built the foundation, and faith and second chances held the walls up. Inside the center rooms buzzed with activity, the job training office filled with adults practicing interview skills. The food pantry stocked shelves with donations that arrived weekly from vendors who owed favors to men still loyal to Victor. The after-school program welcomed children with backpacks, laughter echoing through the hallways. The medical clinic staffed 2 nurses and a volunteer doctor who rotated through 3 days a week. Families who had once struggled silently now had a place to breathe, to ask for help without shame. And every time someone thanked me, I wanted to say, "Don't thank me. Thank the choice I made when I could have walked away." My role at the Ferraro Foundation grew as well. At first, I only coordinated assistance requests, matching families to resources and documenting each case with care. But as the months passed, I became the voice on the phone for people who had run out of options. I visited homes, shelters, even hospitals. I listened to stories of heartbreak and survival, and with every person I met, I understood more deeply what Victor meant when he said the world changed through small acts. Ben thrived too. The full health insurance coverage meant his asthma was finally managed properly. No more rationing inhalers, no more midnight panic. He joined the after-school art club at the center and decorated my office wall with colorful drawings of superheroes, though he once told me quietly, "You're the real superhero mom." Luca became a constant presence in our lives, not in a threatening way, but in the quiet, steady way of someone who understood loyalty down to its bones. He attended board meetings with me, drove me to outreach events, and taught me how to navigate a world where favors meant more than signatures on contracts. Despite his sharp suits and intimidating background, he had a surprising warmth, especially with Ben, who adored him. The neighborhood changed as well. People who once pulled their children inside when they saw men in dark coats now volunteered beside them. Mrs. Dalton became one of our most dedicated helpers, organizing book drives and tutoring kids who struggled with reading. Even Mr. Rodriguez, the man who once shouted at me in anger, now spent Saturdays repairing bicycles for the community children. Their shift wasn't dramatic. It was gradual, like a cold morning warming under the first rays of sunlight. Little by little, trust replaced suspicion. Courage replaced fear. Community replaced isolation. As for Victor, his recovery brought strength back into his voice and color back into his face. He visited the center often, always quietly, always without drawing attention. He didn't want credit. He didn't want recognition. He wanted to see whether his son's memory was truly alive in the work we did. One afternoon, as we walked through the hallway lined with children's drawings, he stopped suddenly and placed a hand on the wall. "This," he said softly, "is what Marco deserved. A chance, a future, a place that believed in him." I placed my hand beside his. "Victor, this place exists because of you." He shook his head. "No, Elena, it exists because of you. You reminded me that life is worth fighting for." The gala came next, a fundraiser for our expanding programs. I had never attended anything so elegant. The room sparkled with golden lights and linen-draped tables. Guests in suits and gowns gathered to hear stories about lives we had changed. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped onto the stage, palms sweating, and looked out at the sea of faces. Wealthy donors, business owners, former skeptics, bikers in tailored jackets, people who once judged me standing beside people who once frightened me. I told them about the night everything changed. I told them how fear whispered for me to walk away, how compassion pulled me forward, how a $10 bill sparked a movement none of us could have predicted. When I finished, the room rose in applause. Real, heartfelt, thunderous applause. And as I looked into the crowd, I saw Ben standing tall beside Luca, clapping with all his might. In that moment, I realized something profound. Saving Victor hadn't just saved him. It had saved me, too. It had given me purpose, family, and a place in the world that no longer felt temporary or fragile. One quiet evening after the gala, I stood alone outside the community center. The lights inside glowed softly. Children's laughter drifted through an open window. And for the first time in years, I wasn't worried about tomorrow. I wasn't calculating bills or rationing groceries. I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was simply living, simply grateful, simply whole. Victor once told me the world was changed by people who refused to walk away. I used to think he meant people like him, but now I know he meant people like us. Ordinary people who choose to do something extraordinary when life gives them the chance. Some evenings after the last light in the Reyes Community Center flickers off and the hallway settles into silence, I find myself walking back to the place where everything began. The old parking lot, the cold pavement, the flickering streetlight that once cast a trembling glow over a man dying alone while the world told me to run. I stand there now not as the frightened mother clutching her last $10, but as a woman who learned how a single choice can rewrite a life. The asphalt hasn't changed. The shadows still fall the same way. But I am not the same. I look at that spot and remember how terrified I was. I remember the voices screaming at me to walk away. I remember the taste of panic in my throat as I pressed aspirin into a stranger's mouth and prayed he would breathe again. I remember thinking I might lose everything. Instead, I gained everything. And that is the first lesson I want to share with you. One act of courage can turn a life. Sometimes the smallest brave choice is the hinge on which an entire world swings open. The second lesson is this: you do not have to be wealthy or powerful to make a difference. I wasn't. I was exhausted, underpaid, barely surviving. My hands shook not because of heroism, but because of fear and hunger and the weight of responsibility I carried every day. And still, that moment mattered. People think they need to be extraordinary to help others. They don't. I wasn't extraordinary. I was stubborn enough to care. The third lesson is something I learned only after Victor told me his story. Pain travels through generations unless someone chooses to stop it. Victor spent years drowning in regret over a son he couldn't save. I spent years drowning in the memory of my mother dying on a bench while strangers looked away. When I helped him, our grief collided, and for the first time, something beautiful grew from it. Humanity is built on the moments when someone refuses to let pain continue its path. You can be that person for someone else. The fourth lesson is simpler, but maybe the hardest. People are never just who they appear to be. The world told me Victor was a threat, a criminal, a man to fear. But the man I found dying in that parking lot wasn't a monster. He was a father, a grieving human being with a promise to keep. And I ask you now honestly, how many people have you judged by the first glance? The fifth lesson is one I live by every day at the community center. Kindness doesn't always repay you quickly, but it always returns. Not always in money, not always in recognition. Sometimes it returns in the form of a child laughing in an after-school classroom because they finally feel safe. Sometimes it returns when a mother sits across from me and realizes she doesn't have to choose between medication and rent anymore. Sometimes it returns simply in the knowledge that you helped someone stand when the world was determined to knock them down. And the final lesson, the one I hope you carry with you, is this: the world does not change because of big moments. It changes because of small ones, quiet ones, scary ones, moments when no one is watching and you must choose between fear and compassion. That night, no cameras followed me. No applause waited for me. It was just me, a dying man, and a choice. And that choice became the seed of a community reborn. So now I'm asking you, whoever you are, wherever you live, think of the moment you turned away when someone needed you. Think of the person you were afraid to approach. Think of the kindness you wish someone had shown you once, and then go offer it to someone else. Do it today. Do it now. Let your courage begin where your fear tries to end you. Go be someone's Elena.